Hello, everyone. We've added this note to the beginning of all of our original episodes of the podcast to let you know of a few changes that have happened around here and hopefully avoid any confusion for you as listeners. When we began this podcast, it was called Starseed Survival Guide, and most people called me, your host, by my birth name, Erin. Throughout the first 22 episodes, you'll hear me introduce myself as Erin, hear others refer to me as Erin, and hear many references to the name of the show being Starseed Survival Guide. In 2018, more and more folks began calling us Yaya, and in March of 2020, we changed the name of this podcast to Earthside Survival Guide to more accurately reflect our intentions for the show. For a little more of the full story of what these changes mean to us, please check out episode 23, a temple talk where we reflect on where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. We thank you for your patience during this transition, for listening and sharing this journey with us, and most importantly, for allowing us to continue to grow and evolve. Blessings.
And as I call in the east, I walk into the stream. And as I call in the south, I bring water to my mouth. And as I call in the west, the creek swallows my chest. And as I call in the north, I am swallowed by her soul.
Greetings, Starseeds, and welcome to the Starseed Survival Guide podcast. I'll be your host, Erin Rivera Merriman, and I'm honored to facilitate a place for us to virtually gather to be seeded, activated, and germinated by the infinite well of galactic and terrestrial wisdom that is available to all in every moment. Thank you for hearing the call, for remembering that there is so very much more to life, and showing up to explore the secret, esoteric, mystical, and unorthodox pathways to liberation that are and forever will be open to you and all who seek them with sincerity. We welcome and hail to the guardians and the gatekeepers who dwell eternally in the liminal realms. We humbly beseech your assistance today in opening these portals between the dimensions so that those who have tuned in with this transmission may find themselves able to listen from a deeper place and receive the hybrid medicine and restructuring that the helper spirits who called this broadcast into being so generously provide. May you as sacred listeners hear what you need to hear and discard anything that is not of value to your own stated intentions for your life and the fulfillment of your soul's purpose in the most enjoyable, most beautiful possible way. Starseed Survival Guide is a listener-supported program, and we hope that if you find value in the experience we share here today, that you might consider offering support by visiting us online at www.activeculturefamily.com and making a purchase or donation. Many blessings to you on your journey, and we hope you enjoy the show. Greetings, Starseeds. It's me, Erin, and I'm honored to be joined here today by one of my first guides on my shamanic path, Garifuna elder Arzu Mountain Spirit. Arzu is a traditional healer, writer, life coach, and international presenter on the subject of Garifuna spirituality, healing methods, and medicinal plants. In addition to maintaining her healing practice in Belize, she is also the founder of the Wagiya Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation of Garifuna healing ways and spiritual traditions. Welcome, Arzu. I'm so honored to have you on the show today.
Wow, thanks, Erin. The honor is equally mine.
Well, to just get right into it, I know that prior to meeting you, I was not aware of the Garifuna people, and I'm wondering if you could begin by sharing a little bit with our listeners about Garifuna culture and cosmology.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I don't even know if we have all that time, but that's my favorite topic in the whole world. Excuse me. The Garifuna people are the descendants of the Arawaks, and with a mixture of African heritage. So it's both. It's both traditions. So it's African and Amerindian. And the Garifuna means people of the cassava. So the cassava, which is the what makes our sacred bread, ereba, is our sacred plant. And there are cassava people. All the Arawakian nations honor the cassava as their sacred plant. So in our case, we are descendants from St. Vincent, which used to be our country. And we lived there very peacefully until the British decided to take it over. And there was a 30-year war where our people fought the British for 30 years. So we were burying people every day. And after the 30 years, the British brought in this huge armada to destroy the entire nation. 4,000 people out of several million, 4,000 people survived. And they put them all on ships to be sent to be sold into slavery, because that's what the British did. This was 1797. And on the way, they met a Spanish armada, and the ships got diverted and ended up in Roatan, Honduras, which is where we stayed undocumented, just part of the land. But our ancestors made it a point to secure their presence there by engaging the government in a deal where we will protect your borders, we will protect your coast, because we're obviously good warriors. We fought your enemy for 30 years. So Honduras took us in that way. And if you look at the settlements of Garifuna people in Honduras, they're all in strategic points where they're forts and borders and boundaries. So we have always protected them. And in return, the government gave us pieces of land. What has happened recently, of course, the government has turned now. It's been over 150 years, and they've started to take the lands back through some very unscrupulous ways. So our people every day, we are losing the lands that we have inherited since we've been outside of our country. Now, when the British took us out of St. Vincent, it was an exile. It was an official exile. So we lost our country, ended up in Central America. We're now dispersed throughout Central America. Um, from the 4,000 that left St. Vincent, a little under 2,000 arrived. So we were burying people every day from the day we left. It was a 4-month journey. And we were burying an average of 10 dead every single day on the journey. So when we arrived in Honduras, of course, we were in a hell of a state. But from there has arisen the nation that we now have, which is a Garifuna nation. We are 400,000 strong, and we're scattered throughout Central America. That's Nicaragua, um, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and of course the United States and Europe. So that's about the encapsulated version I can give you. That's a little bit of our history. We are an ancestral tradition nation. But what we consider, who and what we consider the ancestors is really the key to our system. Ancestors to us are every natural thing, every life form, every natural thing that conspired with the universe for us to be here today. So it's not just a person or a relative necessarily, but like the trees, 1,000-year-old tree, that's my ancestor. I'm a medicine woman. All the medicines that I use that heal are my ancestors. And of course, the actual people that contributed the genetic material to produce me are my ancestors. So when we set up an altar, all of those ancestors are represented there. It's my maternal ancestors, my paternal ancestors. There are rocks, crystals, leaves, sticks, sand, water, shellfish, snakes, That's why our altars have all of those things on there. So it's not just the people, the ancestors, is all of the life forms. And those are the ones that continue to protect us, just like a parent would. So our belief system insists that all of nature is designed to take care of us, and we are designed to produce loving energy for them. And it's that simple. So that's why we honor them. You know, it's not that we are resuscitating the dead or honoring dead things, which is how Westerners insist on explaining it. It is because we honor and acknowledge where we come from, where we all come from. And this isn't a color thing, it isn't a race thing, this is a human thing. Because all humans have ancestors.
Thank you. I really loved that piece where you said that we're designed to produce loving energy for the natural world. I like to say, like, they don't call it making love for nothing. Like, the idea that, like, it's not a question where love comes from. Like, we can make it. Oh. So, I know that you were born into a long line of matriarchal Garifuna healers. So, your teachers in your path are your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother. Many of us who come from bloodlines of healers carry this wound of having Catholicism or witch burning forcibly eradicating our matriarchal wisdom. So, for example, we inherit an empathic sensitivity, but then we don't receive the training in using this ability as a way of, say, gathering vital information from a patient or client. So rather than being a powerful tool, it becomes just a huge inconvenience or discomfort. And I've found that I've needed to spend a huge amount of my own journey just reclaiming the true divine significance of many aspects of my lineage that have been pathologized in the Western world. So when I visited you in Belize in, I think it was 2008, I was really fascinated by the creative ways that the Garifuna had found to keep traditions alive despite the continued presence of Catholic missionaries. Can you help us to understand what qualities that Garifuna people possess that enabled you to resist this domination, and then some of what you were able to learn directly from the women of your own family by choosing to incarnate into an intact wisdom stream?
Oh wow, that's let's try to answer that one. Well, first of all, I want to say that they weren't light transgressions against us. They were out and out, just vicious persecutions, where the Catholic Church would sic the police into our temples, and our high priest would be dragged out and shamed and dragged through the village, accused of conducting devil worshiping ceremonies when we were just trying to honor our ancestors. So we went through all of that. What our ancestors did, I'm talking about my great grandparents, they met with the Catholic Church and wanted to know what they wanted. And it turned out it was all about money. So the agreement was made that before any ancestral ceremony, we would go to church and make a donation. And until this day, our most sacred ceremony begins with everybody going to a Catholic church and donating money. So I just wanted to put that out there in the background.
Well, I do remember when I visited you that the Catholic priest was in the offering room on his cell phone in your temple, and I found that just so shocking.
He came to collect his money. He came to collect his money. Yeah. I mean, we just tell the truth. That's why nobody really cared that he was on a cell phone. He came to collect his money because I refuse, and it's a whole group of us, we just refuse to do that for this particular ceremony. This is the one you participated in, right? It's like there's no need for that anymore. The other thing I wanted to say, that question brought so much to my head. It's not over. It's not over. And we are not the only tradition that was badgered like that. all of the traditions that connect humans directly to their source were treated and are still being treated the same way. Don't tell people what religion to practice, but if you're going to practice something, if you're going to practice anything, find something that reconnects you to your source. Don't let anybody convince you of what that is. Now, the secret, your question about what the secret to us persevering and surviving and still maintaining our tradition is that it's real. Our connection to our ancestors, our connection to nature and our source is real. And it has nothing to do with belief. Belief is a dangerous thing. The reason that Garifuna mythology and cosmology is so much alive amongst us is because it has nothing to do with belief. It's real. We really communicate in higher worlds. The healings that we request from our ancestors really do take place. We find no reason to dance around and sing and say, oh, wow, this is a miracle, because that's normal for us. It's supposed to be like that.
Yeah.
That's the way it's supposed to be. I was at Pecola Estes. I love her. She says, I don't go around saying my heart is beating, my heart is beating. I mean, that's crazy. Your heart is supposed to beat, right? Even though your heart beating is a miracle, nobody really knows what that comes from. So that's the difference. And I find people who are already connected to a beautiful tradition that connects them to their source, but they get shamed into belief. You're not supposed to believe it. If you use soap to wash your clothes, you can wash your clothes in water, plain water. But you're gonna notice when you wash them with soap, it's cleaner. You don't have to have faith in the soap for it to wash your clothes. Because it's soap.
That's what it does.
Right. So these people who go around picking religions and traditions or doing something because their grandmother did it and that's what their mother did, need to stop and examine, is this connecting me to my source? Is this real? And if you need a whole lot of belief to hold something together, if you need belief to practice your connection to the creator, then something's wrong. It's not real. Because when something is real and when something works like soap, you don't have to believe on it. It works whether you believe it or not.
Thank you. So I don't know if you want to share or not about the last piece of the question, which is, what are some of the things that, because for a lot of us, it's like a fantasy that like wisdom would have been passed on through our family. So it's this kind of like, ooh, like, what must that be like? Like, what was passed down to you? What did you learn from the women of your family?
How I can be a better transmitter of loving energy. That's the only wisdom we're really interested in, Erin. Really. It's like if you have a job, you have a profession, and you want to excel, you just want to know how to do what you do better. And if what we do intentionally is channel loving energy, then we just need to know how to do it better. So when our ancestors suffer and they are able to transcend it with loving energy, they hand us the wisdom as to how they did that. What kind of thoughts they had to have, what kind of action they had to take. We're the only surviving people. Of all the attempts that were made on nations, of all the genocide attempts that were made on nations, we're the only survivors. And yet, we marry white people, we engage, we don't carry a chip. There's no animosity. We're still able to embrace in loving energy. And I think that's one of the greatest accomplishments of our ancestors, is that they've been able to hone this nation of people into a loving people. You remember when you were in our village? Did you feel different?
I did. I was very sick at that time and I was deeply disconnected, and so coming there was like on, on my last legs almost. And I was able to have an experience of really connecting and feeling spirit in my vessel, in a, like you said, not as a belief, that I'm a vessel for spirit, but as a real bodily sensation of relief and energy. And I didn't speak the language. I didn't know what was being said in ceremony, like what was being said in the songs. So there's no way that it could have been concocted in my mind. It was really just a direct experience of, raising the vibration as a group to a place where we're all kind of going together into this connection to spirit.
Mm-hmm. But you felt the love.
Yeah. And I think this kind of part of my question is like, what is it about your people? Because like there are these like different flavors of love, and it was like a flavor of love that had this tenacity in it that I could see in everyone and really respect. So it was like, it's not, rainbow heart sticker cartoon love. Like it had this like tooth to it that I respected and wanted to like understand more about where that comes from. And the sort of fortitude that is nevertheless very loving. So when I came to Belize and we were in ceremony together, it was interesting. I remember the only thing you said to me before it began by way of preparation was, go where the drum takes you. And this, I really just stayed with that. Just stay with the drum, stay with the drum, stay with the drum, and focus on that. And what happened, was the second time ever in my life that I actually felt like what I now think of as healer spirits, not just like great spirit, but real like spirit doctors kind of come into my body and animate my hands. And some of the other attendees remarked in the morning, oh, we were watching you. You were really feeling it. And I remember your buye, which is, your kind of word for a shaman in my understanding, said, oh yes, I was watching her. Her spirits came. They weren't brown. And, it was kind of shocking because I had spent so long pursuing the bloodline healing gifts of my mother's side and trying to understand these ways through that lens, which on her side of the family is really characterized by like empathy and mediumship. So it was frustrating, confusing to kind of commit to this pilgrimage, to say like, I'm gonna go to the source of the Arawak tradition, which is where the Garifuna and the Tainu kind of merge ancestrally. And then it almost felt like a scavenger hunt where I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing, I'm gonna make this commitment, and then kind of be sent elsewhere. It felt like, where it was kind of like, go bark up the other side of your family tree. And so, I did turn my attention to learning, genealogy and ancestry on my father's side, which is definitely more explicitly like nature worshiping, tree worshiping scholars and druids. And it kind of put me in this place with my seeking where I just realized like increasingly we're all like hybrids. Like the world is this melting pot now. So it's increasingly rare to really have like one lineage to follow. And you know, a lot of us are in this condition where the blood of the conqueror and the conquered is running through our veins, you know, as one blood. So it makes it difficult to form an identity. And you know, I see a lot of people challenged with, you know, not being sure if they have the right to claim their ancestral magic, even though that is there in every area of the world and was taken by force. My question is, you know, you're touching on a lot of these things already. What advice do you have for someone who feels called to seek an ancestral connection to spirit and, you know, wants to understand that in the context of their human ancestors, but is, you know, working with blended bloodlines and, you know, not maybe just half white and half native, where you have these two traditions to hybridize and integrate, but like, you know, the real mutts and rainbow lineage people like me that are, you know, like 26% native, 9% Bedouin, Mongolian, Taino, Irish, English, German, you know.
Wow. Well, let's start off by this. First of all, avoid any of those DNA tracking database services to determine your ancestry. Number one. Number two, connecting with your ancestors is almost like downloading an app. Okay? Because ancestor practice is all about data. And when you connect with an ancestor, all you're doing is creating a connection where you can download data. It's not about uploading. They don't need anything from you. In fact, the only thing they need is loving energy. If you're going to give, that's about all they could use is loving energy. There's nothing else that you are capable of producing that they could use. So it's about downloading data. So when you're connecting with an ancestor, that's why I said to you, let the drums guide you. You don't pick. The vibrational frequency of the earth will take you to the nearest one, or the one that's ready to communicate with you. You don't want them all coming at once. You want them to come gently with the beating of the drum. Some people do it with takisami. There's certain traditions where they do it with the flute or with the rattle. These are all vibrations, but they accomplish the same thing. They bind you or connect you with the ancestor that's nearest by. But these are just data transfers. They're just transferring data. For example, if you're in need of something, let's say you want to be a healer, you want to know, in my case, you want to know about plants. All of the plant spirits will conspire to work through the ancestor that's closest to you. And it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's from 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But it will be someone who has a match with your DNA frequency. Because remember, all DNA is a frequency. So ancestry just means that there's a vibrational frequency to your DNA. There's a similarity there, so they can jive. So drumming and all these other vibrations kind of force those frequencies to come together. So the data coming in from the higher world can find its way to download into your set, your earth set, you know, your database that you're working with in this life. So we have to stop looking at it as people, things to appropriate, and then transferring our earthly values to spiritual things. You cannot give me the right to connect with my ancestor, nor can you take it away. And you cannot give me the right to share wisdom of my ancestors, nor can you deny it. You cannot. This is something that I do with my life, with my vibrational frequency. And every single human being is entitled to that.
We were speaking of this before, but I'm noticing that a lot, I'm 35. I was born in Connecticut. I, a lot of my peers, I like to really just keep that in mind, that I'm like a 35-year-old American who is trying to follow like this ancient breadcrumb trail and ensure my own direct connection to spirit for myself and for my children. And so, we're all reading books and reading articles, and just the climate of spiritual seeking right now, to me, it feels like this question of cultural appropriation is so alive for people, and that people who are really sincere practitioners are wanting so badly to be in integrity and not be appropriating in a way that causes harm, or appropriating in a way that causes harm. But that I'm seeing that this can like reach a kind of fanaticism or be taken to an extreme where women are really almost policing each other around things like the use of the rattle or the drum or feathers, things that have, from my real intellectual understanding, have existed in every area of the world. And then, things like feathers that are gifted to us by the animals themselves sometimes. So it's something that I find so self-evident, our right to use the tools that human beings have universally created to access spirit, that I have trouble responding effectively to the dialogue, and I tend to kind of switch off when I see it happening. But I also feel that it's causing, like I said, very sincere practitioners to be so careful, and that they're actually like not sharing what they do.
The right for every single human being to a higher world is theirs as soon as they're born. That's why we're born here. The only reason we come to this world, to this plane, is to work towards the higher world, to learn how to access higher worlds. That's it. Everything is to go up. And what others who don't know any better, I guess they say towards God. Okay? That's one way of looking at it. You can also look at it as towards evolution or non-evolution. We engage in evolutionary behavior, which takes us towards the God nature, or non-evolutionary behavior, which takes us to the other side. You are entitled to utilize any and all of the elements to access the higher worlds. And those of us, the indigenous people who have been granted the gift of keeping the wisdom, it's not just for our people, it's for humanity. So while the Gauls and the Teutons and the barbarians and all of those northern tribes were killing their psychics and warring and fighting over land and all of that, so we were on the other side just holding the vessels. So that it's like if your 2-year-old kid has a tantrum, at the end of it all, you still fix them their food because you know they're going to grow up. They know they're not going to stay in that state of tantrum. So you don't keep denying them just because they threw a tantrum some time ago, or just because that's their nature. So what the wisdom that indigenous people have Yes, it's for indigenous people, but it is medicine that we are holding for humanity. So if any human comes to a place of understanding where they can come to the temple like you did with reverence and respect, and the ancestors can communicate with them and they can follow the drums, you're receiving the medicine that we've been holding. So anybody who's holding wisdom and denies it and doesn't share it, then they're not fulfilling the end of their mission. But eventually they will learn too. But I also don't want people who don't have an indigenous tradition or a connection to an indigenous tradition to feel that they're lost, that they can't connect to anything. And if they do connect to anything, that it's a fake connection. Because you're not connecting to the people, excuse me, what you're connecting to is the data, the wisdom. Yeah. So that you can generate more loving energy. So your life can be more in alignment with evolutionary behavior and more evolutionary behavior. We are not we're not just producing love, we are becoming love. That's the goal. So all rules are off if you're on your way to becoming love. I mean, that's the way we see it anyway. So we don't cut people off, and we don't embrace beliefs that separate people. Didn't I give you my feathers?
You did.
Okay. I was wondering what happened to them.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, who are you allowing to make the decision for you? Is it the ego or is it your God nature? Because the ego wants to claim everything. But your God nature wants to share everything. That's just I'm only a point of view, Erin.
But I feel it and I resonate with it. And, like you said, it's not like something I'm choosing to believe you. I experienced, taking a little bus to the cab, to the hike with my backpack, to this place where people were dancing in their temple and allowed me to come and receive the medicine of your wisdom. So, have nothing but the utmost gratitude for the welcoming, inclusive point of view and perspective. Thank you. So I mentioned earlier as an example, like the idea of being an empath is something that might run in the family. And I wanted to visit this concept a little bit more deeply with you because it's something that I see a lot of people in general, but especially star seeds, people that identify with their starry nature in particular, struggle with. So during my first healing with you, I remember you asking me if I drank alcohol. And I said no, and you said, oh, because you have the liver of an old alcoholic. And this was before I shared with you that my father was in that moment dying of liver cancer and had drank secretly my whole childhood. And so in that moment, you kind of diagnosed me as a priestess and an empath and gave me a list of preliminary ways to take care of myself. which, no one had ever just taken me aside and said, hey, these like things that you're struggling with, like we have a name for that, and there are some tools for you. Um, and it's my hope that this show might eventually become that kind of resource for young people who, maybe are growing up in the Midwest or in families whose religions is not a good fit for them and what they're needing. So I'm wondering if you'd be willing to explain for our listeners what an empath is and how you might know you're an empath, and what some survival tips might be for empaths living in this age of hyperstimulation.
Okay. Now, oh yeah, wow. Empaths, first of all, for some reason, we suffer just a little bit more than regular people. I know, right? It's sad, but let's get that out of the way. And being an empath, um, it, it just means that there's one or all of your senses can access a higher world at any time for insight. So you might feel things. It can come to you through feelings, through touch. It can come to you through smell or through hearing, or to just a sensation in the center of your body. You can get a taste in your mouth. Like some people get cotton mouth. So it's good to know when you have insight to check and see where you're feeling it physically, and then you'll know what type of empath you are. But empaths are individuals who have a heightened sensitivity to subtle energies through any or all of their senses. Because you can have all 5 of them that go on, which is really annoying. Please don't pray for that. You're okay with 1 or 2 senses. Now, there are a lot of problems with empaths. I just want to talk about one. I know you told me to tell the nice stuff, but I just want to do the cautionary stuff. When empaths sometimes confuse their own emotions with other people. And I just want to describe a pitfall. Just one pitfall, there are many. People are entitled to their private thoughts and ideas and opinions. But an empath, because they sense it, they go ahead and react to it. And that person has only had a thought. Like, for example, you, I'm sure, many times have thought about choking somebody or smacking someone, and then that thought transformed into something else, and you were never really going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. Right? But an empath, if an empath picked up on that, they would react to where you wanted to do damage to them. Like they would react in the physical world. They would either dislike you or tell you something or get this vibe that you don't like them. So the first thing an empath has to do, I think, is to differentiate what is being picked up in your empathic sense and what you are really feeling. So that's where a lot of empaths invite their own suffering. And that's one of the first things I teach, is to be able to check your own feelings and then allow people the privacy of their own feelings. So if you sense that they want to smack you or something, just let it go, because you have no business in their thoughts anyway.
Oh gosh.
No, you don't. And it really works bad in relationships, because men don't have the same filter. So they'll be thinking all kinds of things. Like these women, I just had this with one of the in one of the retreats I did, where it's an empath. This woman is extremely psychic, very empathic, and she's constantly accusing her husband of cheating on her. He's never cheated on her. And he was really suffering. In fact, he's the one who sent for me. But he's entitled to think like a man when somebody walks by. But she's reacting to that instead of shrugging it off as, oh, well, he's entitled to his own thoughts. So you really, it's not recommended that you develop your psychic abilities or your empathic abilities until you have learned to master your emotions. Because if you're the jealous type, you're going to suffer. If you're insecure in any place, you're going to suffer. You're going to drive yourself into a nervous breakdown, and it's only your gift.
You're like, your intuition is tuning in with something, some of the deeper levels of where my question comes from, being in a community of people who are awakening their gifts or really developing their gifts. And there are a lot of empaths in the community, and I call it, there's like a place that I can get to in intimate relationship and sisterhood, like occasionally, that I call an empathic feedback loop, where it's like whatever my unhealed stuff, you want to call it karma or insecurities, and then their karma, insecurities, challenges that they're working through, if those have like a point of overlap and then both people are empaths, it gets so confusing. Like it becomes this like funhouse mirrors of like what's real. And I have actually found the only tool that I have in that place is to breathe and observe, because if I say or do anything from that place, it just explodes relationships like so effectively.
Erin, your best friend and most powerful tool as an empath is your breath. It's your breath. First of all, excuse me, no, I don't have my breath. First of all, you always have access to it. It's at your command. And even when you're too dumb to breathe, it does it anyway. So your breath is your greatest friend. And the best thing we can do is to train ourselves to work with the breath and let the breath take us. That is the best thing we can do. So when you fall into that short circuit, where you pick up something as an empath and then your emotions come in, the best thing to do is to bring in your breath. Now, what happens when you are in an empathic mode and you pick up something and you go into emotional mode? What happens is you create a chemical reaction in the other person. And you'll find that in empaths, when I do an intake with the coaching with them, that they have no relationships, or every relationship is wrecked. And it's only their gift, because they're continually producing these reactions in people, but they think it's other people. They don't know it's them.
And the piece, that's coming up for me when you're mentioning like you produce chemical reactions in other people, you're really describing, so many years of my journey. I wish that I had the vocabulary. It's like you don't know what you don't know, but I wish that I had the vocabulary to ask these questions or voice these questions to you when we were working together more regularly. It would have saved me like a decade of, painful relationship experiences. But I think that for me, that my empathy came in, at birth or shortly after. So it was something I took for granted that I didn't understand to be a gift or a tool or in any way. And it came in long, long before any level of emotional mastery. And so the emotional mastery is just really coming in the past couple years. And so my experience of intimacy was very much these like empathic reverberations that manifest as cascades of chemicals. So you're mentioning how we can create these cascades of chemicals in other people, but I can speak really directly to how damaging it is to be over taxing your endocrine system by like living in such a level of sensitivity in relating, where you're just needing to produce these, like adrenaline, and then you're needing to clear all that adrenaline out of your liver. So that's probably where this like liver piece came in, so there's a real body burnout that comes from not quite knowing how all of your gifts, strengths and weaknesses fit together.
Yeah. But there are things that sensitives can do to make their lives easier.
Yeah.
For example, don't consume slaughtered animals. Good. That would just take care of 50% of your problems. Because as your body's processing that flesh, it's also connecting to their endocrine system, that the chemicals that they produced while they were suffering and being slaughtered. So if you notice animals that are slaughtered for ceremony, it's a very, very merciful process.
Yeah.
So that none of those chemicals are allowed to enter the bloodstream.
And I know the idea of like ritual killing is one of the most like horrific ideas to the sort of like Western Christian mind. But the more that I have really delved deeply into this, I've seen that truth that in a true spirit-centered ceremony, the animals and the people, everybody is connected and playing their role, and that those chemicals don't enter into the animals. And that's what a lot of the insistence on pastured eggs and pastured animals is in the ancestral foods tradition that I'm working with right now, is so that you're not consuming those chemicals of torture.
Yeah, because you as an empath, it won't affect other people that way. But you as an empath, it will bond with your emotional chemicals. And remember, your emotional chemicals are tools. They're not just chemicals. They're serving you as tools. They're working all the time. So you're raising your sensitivity, but it's a pain. You're connecting with pain and suffering. And so you become like a little magnet for pain and suffering. You don't want to, but for some reason, you start attracting the pain and suffering. So not eating slaughtered animals, number one. Of course, the other thing is to take in as much live food. And I don't mean live, by live, I don't mean kicking and screaming. I mean, as much sun energy as possible. Sun energy through the food. Those are like simple things to follow. And of course, you do need a practice, because taming the mind is a practice. Disciplining your breath is a practice. The type of meditation that your type of gift needs is a practice. Preparing your vessel. If you really want to go into this walk, then you prepare your vessel. Clean it out, body, mind, clean out, and it's a process. And then you begin to work with your tools in an organized system that is consistent with you, of course. I certainly don't approve. I have some women that want to leave their husband and children to do spirit work. Well, that's not okay. Abandoning people is not necessary, because when you start walking with spirit, everyone who is not in alignment with you will be taken away. And again, that's where we get in our own way, because we start grabbing. Spirit is trying to clean out our toxic social circle, and we're trying to save these relationships. So these are some of the things that we do to get in our own way, but if we didn't do them, we would definitely have a clearer and happier walk.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's funny because there's one of those things where it's like, gosh, I wish I had met you 10 years ago, but I did. And it just, you don't hear it the same way, So there's certain things that I guess we just have to walk the road.
Now, if you want to do a fast track to aligning your gifts, you want to do a fast track? You want to hear the real secret?
Sure, yes.
Eliminate everything sweet. Now, you can eat fruit, like whole pieces of fruit. That's okay. But sweet foods, and that includes honey, stevia, brown sugar, all of those, agave, all of those healthy alternatives. If you want to jumpstart your psychic abilities, you take anything that tastes sweet to your tongue, with the exception of complete fruits. Just take it out. Try it for a week. You don't believe me? Just don't believe. In fact, don't believe me. Try it for a week.
Yeah, it's been one of the most challenging things for me is kicking the sugar addiction, because I think a lot of people don't believe they have a sugar addiction because it's so normalized in our culture. But I think unless you're actively trying to not have it, then then you have sugar addiction.
That's why I encourage everyone to try it for a week, and then you decide if you're an addict or not.
Yeah, exactly.
1 week, watch what happens. But once you get to the other side, you're gonna see what's gonna happen to your third eye. It'll start to open, and you will begin to resent anything sweet in your mouth because it's worth it. Once you get it going, yeah, you can have sweet here and there, but you'll know the compromise that you're making. And I tell you, that's the easiest way. That's why I take my people into nature, where we engage in just natural foods. You can have all the fat you want, all the other stuff, but it's the sugar that gets in the way of your connection to higher worlds.
Thank you. So yeah, one of the reasons that I had originally cut out sugar was because how it was affecting my fibromyalgia, which is, a chronic pain condition that all the women of my family have been challenged with. And I've come to see fibromyalgia as an atheistic way of describing empathic gifts. That if you really can't get down with the idea that you have a psychic ability that requires a different kind of self-care, then that diagnosis is what you're left with, which basically is Western medicine's way of saying, yes, we agree that you're in a lot of pain and we have no idea why. And furthermore, we have no tools to offer you that will cure you or even help you be more comfortable. That's just my experience. But so the first half of my life, being in my body meant being in pain, which in a way I can see was serving me because it protected me from a kind of set of experiences that a lot of teenagers go through, and particularly like traumatic sexual experiences that many of my clients are now as adults coming to me to work on healing. So it's kind of a bypass in a way, because I had these really loud signals that were jamming my vessel or my channel, saying like, it hurts in here. So I wasn't really able to hear the subtler cues from my body, or navigate on the basis of, say, desire or pleasure. And so I was making decisions from my head and even my head and my heart, but not as a coordinated sensual organism. And about 2 years ago, I had a Dene medicine woman refer me to an osteopath. And in the course of 6 consecutive treatments, he was able to really align something in my energy body, which was wonderful to feel myself with the absence of pain and begin to get to know myself. But then from then on, I've had a pretty wild journey in trying to make sense of what I would call these huge floods of Kundalini Shakti that come into my vessel. And because of this, event that I was experiencing, and not because of like seeking the experience, I found myself studying classical tantra, because this tradition, speaks about these things and has practices that, like you were just saying, purify the body so that it can become a more suitable container for this kind of big energy. And you can call it Shakti or Kundalini, but to me, there's no distinction. Like, it is sexual energy. So growing up with these more shamanic traditions, and then finding myself immersed in classical tantra, I hear a lot of people from both, sides of that coin, expressing a kind of nostalgic longing for myths or stories of traditions where you would be taken under the wing of a trusted elder or family member or priestess and initiated into adulthood by being given some kind of cumulative, age-appropriate practices that would allow you to understand how to approach the opposite sex with reverence, and how to not cause harm with your sexual energy or cause harm in your early sexual explorations. And so it's a lot of context to, segue into my question of, as an elder, I'm wondering if Garifuna culture addresses this directly, this idea of how to prepare youth for sexual maturity and unsupervised interactions with the opposite sex.
Well, I'll tell you. Um, First of all, before the Catholic Church forced themselves into our villages, we're an openly sexual people. Well, there's no shaming, is what I mean. Um, Boys are acknowledged, girls are acknowledged, and they're taught to have respect for their bodies and respect for each other. But affection is, we hug and we kiss a lot. Grandmothers, grandsons. It's not sexual, but it's not as occulted as it is in Western tradition, because there isn't a whole lot of physical affection. It's all taken like a dark turn. Like you see a father holding a little girl and you start thinking questions. So it's not contaminated. What happens in Garifuna villages or in Garifuna settings is that everybody is involved. The mother is always available to answer questions, but especially the grandmother and your aunts. So from a little child, you feel this openness, like it's an open door where you can discuss it. But when the Catholicism got entrenched, and I remember this was in my lifetime, there was all of this shaming. It's like we can't go swimming naked anymore. Now everybody's looking at each other's body sexually. And the conversation now has to be held in whispers or not at all. So it's graduated to where the conversation is had the day of the wedding. So right before you get married, and I've sat in many of those, where they sit around the bride like hours before, sometimes after she's already married. And all the women in her lineage and the ones in the husband's lineage sit around and tell her and give her advice on how to be a good wife and the things that would be expected of her. It's not shaming either. It's actually quite loving, because the elders express their expectation and along with the welcoming into the family. But that's where sex is addressed. Where it used to be from childhood, and then it graduated to just the day before the wedding.
So I know in Western Tantra, there's kind of a sentiment expressed that's like, we normally get, if you go to public school, you get a 4th grade education, and then you get some health class, anatomy stuff in high school. So there's a sentiment expressed that's like, they just gave us the basics. Like if it was a car, it'd be like, here's the steering wheel, here's the brake, like whatever. Like where is the real like education and the subtlety? So the sentiment is kind of like, there is a need, and sometimes when I say that there's some nostalgia, sometimes it will be expressed as like, well, I'm sure in intact cultures in the past they like addressed all these subtleties, and then people are searching for those systems, which I'm sure some exist. But to me, it's also possible that it's a product of our evolution, that we're such more like subtle beings that we're ready to like have a secondary education become the norm, or some level of like adult sex ed become the norm. And so of course in California there are quite a few adult sex educators, and trying to address that need, but with various roles and titles. So I'm curious, if in Garifuna culture, is there any official role or title for someone who held like gifts or wisdom, or even just a special interest in this department? Like I'm thinking maybe a midwife would be someone who would be approached if there was like sexual dysfunction or a sexually transmitted infection, but wondering if there were fertility rites or rituals that directly address some of the more like subtle aspects of sexual energy exchange.
Well, I told you that happens the day of the wedding. With the men, however, it happens earlier. I have to say, because maybe it's because it's a matriarchal society, I don't know. The men are encouraged to master making love to the women. It's almost Kama Sutra-ish, where all of our men are great lovers. This is like their goal. You know how the woman used to in the old days dream about being a good cook and a great mother and all that. Well, they dream of being a great lover. And that's what they do. So that when they make love to their wives, their goal is for her to be satisfied. So a woman knows when, and that's how obedience is held too. He is such a great lover. She's pretty much going to treat him like a god. That's their goal. And believe you me, they are that good. And so they're not abusive. They don't take to that the hostility, because what they want is that adoration from the woman. So they work the sexual energy to maintain that. And this is not just out there in the street. This is in a marriage situation. That's part of your responsibility. And it doesn't matter, really. There isn't a big deal made out of if he has sex with somebody else, because that's expected too.
Yeah.
It's when we build a shrine around that we make it bigger. So he has a transgression, so what? He's home, he's with the kids, he makes love to you and it's perfect, and that's it. That's what you concern yourself about. He's a provider and whatever. But sex is one of the threads that's used to sew that nuclear family together. So we don't really have rituals, but it's the ritual would be that sitting in that circle and that handing down of knowledge, which is quite embarrassing.
I would imagine if that's the first time that you're going to hear about it and you're going to hear all about it.
No, it's too much. It's too much. But of course, you have to pretend it's the first time.
I like how you brought in the communication piece, because I find that I hold these circles for women and I get to hear a lot of like what different things coming up for women around their sexuality, and a really common one is people being in partnerships where they really love each other and they're really good partners, but there's no erotic or sexual or like devotion energy left anymore, and it's beginning to like deteriorate the fabric of the relationship. And what some of the tantric training around the chakras and Shakti that I have received is that for women this Kundalini actually can flow from above, and that so what I make of that is that to be really embodied and really switched on and turned on and even present, that Shakti has to go make it through all of your chakras. So if you have a communication issue, your throat chakra's closed, the Shakti is not even making it into your lower chakras to join in lovemaking, and so it's going to wane and it's going to not feel special or impactful or spiritual or any of the things we're promised. Yeah. And then I also like how you said that you brought in the thing about monogamy, because it's a fact that it's not a very long experiment, and that the experiment is failing for a lot of couples. That 60% of these marriages are ending in divorce. And so to me it means like we do have to look at what beliefs we have around connection that are not working. We tried, we liked it. Monogamy really helps a lot of our it helps us feel emotional stability or not have to deal with certain feelings, but also it creates other problems. And that, just to hear that it's true. Yes, it's true. There are many cultures all over the world that are happy and, thriving, that don't hold that ideal or hold it as like, because it's wonderful if it works for you, but I just dislike how our culture makes people feel like they're broken and not deserving of love if it doesn't feel natural for them to be monogamous. Yeah.
Because that's so unnatural. And if you look at the history of marriage, it was done for materialistic reasons, so that they can, whatever the powers were when they were setting up these governments, so they can control better land, properties, and rights. And it's like a whole game behind it. It's not based on man's natural flow.
Yeah.
Nobody wants somebody all the time.
Yeah.
Only if we're like totally codependent and there's something wrong with you. Well, I take that back. I shouldn't say it like that. But what I mean is, when we have our lives and we're engaging in our creative energies, you're not obsessing with another person. Yeah. And if my connection with my husband is so weak, I'm with you for 22 years, and my connection with you is so weak that I'm going to abandon that because you had sex with somebody else, that's sick. And speaking, this is only my opinionation. But for me, I feel that if I look at the pros and cons of that, why would I throw a relationship that long with this one human being just because he had sex? So that's how unimportant it is to me.
Yeah, and it kind of works the other way too, which is like less commonly spoken of, which is like, I have a big personality, and a lot of people will say like, oh, that's a lot of personality, or like, wow, like you're so passionate, or like that's a lot of intensity, whether they want to think of it as a good thing or a bad thing. So when somebody, is like, oh, I want all of you, I'm like, you don't. You really don't. Honestly, that's a huge burden to fill all of my needs, because there are many, like many, spiritual and friendship needs and sensual needs, not just talking about sexual needs, just that I kind of have become a proponent of just like more intimacy with more people, not necessarily sex with more people, but a culture that values, or at least allows and honors as valid, having more, like a greater level of intimacy in all of our relationships. Just more touch, more sharing of deep emotions. Maybe sex is part of that, maybe not. Yeah, thank you for just sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, it gets convoluted. This whole business of how we see ourselves and how society sees us, and then people interpreting marriages as though the marriage defines the value of their person. And really, you can handle your marriage business within your marriage. You don't have to make it public. I really warn women, when you go through a transgression with your spouse, keep it to yourself for a minute. Yeah, maybe you need somebody to talk to. Well, talk to someone who's neutral.
Yeah.
Because what we tend to do is turn to the one person that's going to give us the emotional charge towards entropy, towards something that is non-evolutionary. But if we go to someone who's neutral, then whatever decision we have to make will not come from an emotional space.
That feels like good advice, though. Thank you. So, in this bridge between like our sexual, sensual, inner nature, specifically as women, another thing that I see coming up in my community is women that are nearing the end of their childbearing years and feeling our bodies struggling a little bit more to fully participate in our moon cycle or in our hormonal cycle or sexual energy cycle. So from your perspective, because I always like to bring in the plants as allies in these life experiences. In your perspective, what are some of the most important herbs for women that just help us to stay creatively engaged and feel, juicy, feel vitality, and having energy as we move into the end of the mother archetype, that might help us to transition gracefully into baby crones and wisdom keepers.
Yeah. The one that came up first was Damiana. Damiana is, for those of us who have dried up a little, it opens up the vessels, and for some reason it just diverts circulation into that area, into your genitalia. It makes it a little more sensitive. But it's also great for controlling blood pressure. Like if you suffer from anxiety or high blood pressure, I've actually started sharing with women who have high blood pressure because it does regulate it. I'm not going to say lower it, it regulates it so that it's normal. And the Damiana, though, it's an aphrodisiac, but it's very gentle and it works with you. You're not just going to, have an orgasm every time you cross your legs. But if you want to make love and someone is there and you are touched, you will feel it. And you want to be touched. That's the other thing. The herb that I use most that brings complete balance, the one that was created by nature for everything that is woman, is the wild yam, Dioscorea villosa. And I just want to say that in the United States, the wild yam is completely adulterated. And they're not allowing any export of the real wild yam from here. So people are just left to smuggle it, The other plant is the saw palmetto. It's good for men, but it's also good for women. Both the saw palmetto and the wild yam have the precursors to estrogen and progesterone. So when you take them together, you can even use it as a hormone replacement, which some doctors are using, by the way. So you got two really good plants there. Right now, the yohimbe there's a block on it. Yohimbe was another one that diverts circulation to your genitalia very quickly. And it's a delicious feeling. All of them, it's really a beautiful feeling. So if you can try any of those, yes, there is a block on yohimbe, but I'm sure you can get it from a reputable source. Don't just buy it on the internet. Damiana I have, wild yam I have, and saw palmetto I have. I don't have any yohimbe trees.
Wonderful. That's definitely a good little list just for anybody who wants to explore, because I know for myself that my hormone levels are lowering, and one of the main things that I learned from my herbalist teacher was like not to go the route of the progesterone creams and all of the things that they prescribe to women as prescription hormone replacement, but I feel open to just seeing like what the plants might have to offer, not in the sense of like trying to create like an eternal youth or anything, but in having like continuity and like a gentle transition between the phases of life. Like that would be my intention for exploring herbal allies.
Yeah, it'll bring the juices back. And any of them will bring the juices back.
I like the way that a lot of these plants do work just by bringing blood flow, because I feel like blood flow is just attention, and that bringing attention to any area of the chakras or the body is, in my experience, always the primary healer. But then we're raised in an attention deficit distraction culture. So a lot of times what the plants are doing for me is assisting me in prolonging my attention to just be with or explore or observe the subtle workings of a particular aspect of my body or energy body. So a lot of women, will want to seek like a practitioner maybe to help like introduce them to a certain aspect of their sexual energy. But from what you just described, it feels like meditations with these plants where you're actually just feeling the sensation of blood flow moving in that area, or Shakti moving in that area, that those plants could really help women to have a deeper experience of their own Shakti on their own, which I think is really empowering, to not feel that you need a partner, male or female, to have contact or heightened experience of your own Shakti. So thank you.
That's right. Very well put. It would take that dependency off. And with any of them, I would suggest after a week, tag what your orgasm feels like if you're having any. And then at the end of a week, tag it, and you're going to see a quantum difference.
Yeah.
It enhances everything.
And I think sometimes we, like for me, like the idea of enhancement even is kind of like, well, why do you need to do that? And for me, it's like, because our senses are so flooded with information, like we're so overwhelmed with like, you know, really inconsequential information about like weather on the other side of the planet and like tragedies on the other side of the world, like that we're not prepared to do anything about. So sometimes I need to have a heightened experience of something very ordinary, even just to see it, even just for it to be in my awareness in this like flood of other things that are competing for my awareness.
I see for empath especially, an orgasm is like emptying your trash can.
Totally.
Energetically, yeah.
Because I actually have a really hard time with a lot of like cord cutting, like clearing practices, or when I say I have a hard time, I just mean they're ineffective. That's been one of my challenges, and that I just, you know, discovered there's a word that I like that's called meditation, which basically is like creating like spiritual practice around your self-pleasure, and that I have discovered on my own that that's really the most effective cord cutting, most effective energy clearing, that it karma clearing whatever is going on, and you know that we do have access to that ourselves. So I love, yeah, that you connected that back in with the empath piece, because, you know, like sometimes I just really like cannot get people out of my system, and then, you know, that's it's a tool that's very effective, I can say for sure.
Yeah, and they exist for us. They exist for us.
By they, you mean
all of these tools?
yes.
You know, we have our gifts, so that we can make our unique contribution to humanity. And then we have all these tools. But with all of these skewed philosophies and religions that have been dumped on us, we are very confused about what's what. So it's time to bring this wisdom back. And that's another reason why I'm happy that you're doing this podcast.
Thank you. Well, you know, I think we do have to start wrapping up, but I really want to thank you for going there with me. I think part of my vision was kind of like, what would you ask your grandmother if like you weren't too shy to ask, you know? So yeah, I just appreciate all of your answers, and yeah.
Can't wait to see what you do with it.
Really, thank you so much for joining us, Arzu, and for your lifetime of dedicated service to humanity through your work as a healer and wisdom keeper. So if you're listening and are interested in connecting more with Arzu, you can learn more about one-on-one Skype coaching work and residential Mountain Spirit Wellness retreats by visiting www.arzumountainspirit.com, and you can find that link in the show notes on the website. And just a thank you to all the benevolent beings in all the realms who've gathered here today to inspire, direct, and oversee the flow of this conversation. We dedicate any merits accumulated through this work here today to the benefit of all sentient beings. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be well. May all beings know joy and not suffer. Jai Ma, Amen, Namaste, blessed be, Aho, may it be finished in beauty. All your initiation, all your celebrations, showing up with our vibration, showing up in one of us. Beloved, it's been 1,000 years. Love dry your tears. We're here. We're here. We're here. We're here.